Welcome to the Hockey Writers Maple Leafs Lounge, a weekly show from our Toronto Maple Leafs writing crew, bringing you the latest news, rumors, trades, player grades, prospects, and much more. From training camp to the playoffs, from draft day to the trade deadline, our team covers everything that happens with the blue and white. Come on in and pull up a chair. Welcome to the Maple Leafs Lounge.
Hello and welcome back to the Maple Leafs Lounge. I am your host, Peter Baracchini, and as always, I'm joined by my colleague over at the Hockey Writers, as well as fellow Maple Leaf writer, Jim Parsons. Jim, it's been, a few weeks since we last talked about the Austin Matthews signing. Obviously, a lot more signings have happened, and there's still a lot more contract negotiations still needing to happen in Leafs Nation. But before we get into that, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Unfortunately, I have medical issues with my dog. She got into it with a cat and her eye got scratched. And so she has a scratch in her cornea. So for the last few days, we've been giving my dog this medication every 2 hours, which super sucks. No. And so it's been like a rough day around here. Everybody's kind of in the dumps a little bit. But we're going to talk about Toronto Maple Leafs hockey, which is always a little bit of a pick-me-up. So hopefully that'll outweigh some of the negativity around my little puppy. But it's been good and exciting. Always something happening in Leafs Nation. So we'll talk about that today.
Wishing your dog a very speedy recovery and that he or she gets off the IL very quickly and it's back to running around, creating havoc, what have you.
Yeah, I'm hoping she's not on the LTIR.
There you go. All right. As you mentioned, there are, a lot of things to talk to. And the main important information that basically came out in the week since we had a little bit of a hiatus since the Austin Matthews contract was Sheldon Keefe getting his contract extension. It is for another 2 seasons, multi-year deal. He is entering his final year of the contract in 2013-24, which is going to be this season. So another 2 years after this for Sheldon Keefe. Obviously, this was I don't know if you want to call it item number 2, item number 3 on Treliving's list. But in the end, it got done, and the Maple Leafs head coach is still in the fold. What do you make of the contract extension for Keefe, and is it the right move?
Yeah, I would say it's probably the right move. I'm not sure that I'm totally sold that Treliving knows for sure that Sheldon Keefe is the guy. They're giving him enough here that he's going to be the guy for the foreseeable future. But if things go south, they've left themselves enough flexibility to change their mind on this. It's not a super long contract. He already had 1 year left, like you said. These 2 years is not like a long-term 4 or 5 year deal that you see a lot of these big-time, big-name coaches get for big money. That's not what they gave them. So the Toronto Maple Leafs have been sort of consistently keeping things short-term. Other than Austin Matthews, obviously they gave him 4 years. They wanted to do more. This Keefe deal just tells me, okay, this is our team. This is our coach. This is our little window here. If all of these things don't work out to getting us either into, say, the Eastern Conference Final or the final, or winning the Stanley Cup, we'll probably be moving on from some of these pieces. And I think Keefe is part of that. So to me, this contract just sort of looks like we're going to give you a little bit of a bone here. We don't want you coming into this season with this cloud hanging over your head that you are working on your last, year of your contract. So we'll give you 2 more years, but we're not giving you anything more than that.
Yeah, and it also gives him the benefit of the doubt too, with everything that has happened. Obviously, he has great regular season success. I mean, you can't deny his record where it is 166, 71, and 30. That is his records. Is coming in as the Maple Leafs head coach, taking over from Mike Babcock. And I mean, you can't deny the regular season results. It just has been the postseason, whether it has been his roster decisions, not getting the most out of his star players to try and motivate them and get them going. It is sort of that kind of prove me deal kind of situation where it involves the coach, where, you have 2 seasons to try and improve on what you did last season, which is finally winning a round, which is great. But then again, that's not what you want as sort of like the bar set. You want to go be above and beyond. And if he's able to do that with this roster, the new additions in, new look, new mentality, I think this is something that he can probably work with. And he's got a lot of players with character at his disposal. He tends to like those guys that, tend to lay it out on the line. So I think he's got a lot to work with, and he has a lot to prove himself this time around.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard. What are you going to do? if you're Brad Treliving. You have to make one of two choices. You either need to let him go and move on and get somebody new, or you have to give him a vote of confidence and say yes. Because if you come into the season with the 1 year left, like, will the Stars listen to you knowing that any mistake is going to probably cost you your job? Do you want to come into this season on eggshells because any mistake is probably going to cost you your job? Like, all of those things. If you only have 1 year left on your contract, and I think it was Bruce Boudreau had said it on one of the shows recently, he's like, I've gone into years like this where I'm on my last term and I almost never make it through. I don't think I've ever made it through one of those, right?
Mm-hmm.
You don't want that hanging over this team. So either you let him go or you keep him and you give him a couple more years. And I think they've decided there's enough new pieces here. Treliving got to know Keefe a little bit. He's confident enough to go, okay, we're going to give you this last year. We're going to give you a little bit more, try it out. But like I said earlier, if it doesn't pan out and there's no progression and there's no, next round of the playoffs, they have got the wiggle room to go, you know what, we tried, didn't really work. We got to go another direction. But I don't think he had to make a decision, either let him go or give him a little bit more time, because 1 year just wasn't going to do it. It was just there's too many what ifs.
Mm-hmm. And also I think too, where the free agent market in regards to coaching was very, very limited in terms of who is going to replace Keefe. We went around, are we going to fire him? There wasn't a whole lot of people with experience to kind of choose from as well. There were names, but there weren't names that can, come in and do a better job than Keefe at this point. I think that 2 years gives them the window that, like we've both mentioned, to try and test the water, see what's what, how is this going to play out, and take it from there once the second year of this contract extension is done. But yeah, I think there were like a couple of names that I think that would have been ideal candidates. I know that there was Mitch Love in the AHL, but I think he's more of like, get his feet wet as an assistant coach, and then he can move on as, head coach later on in the league, because he worked wonders in the AHL with the Calgary Flames farm system. I thought there maybe would have been a bit of a connection there. But yeah, I do think that was one thing that could have played a factor as well. There wasn't a whole lot of substance out there. They stayed with their guy. And just in regards to the new contract, or not so much with the new contract, but with this team that, Treliving has given Keefe, what are you looking at, or what is your expectation with this roster right now that he doesn't have some of his go-to players that he had previously before, but he has names that he can still use to his advantage?
Like, are you asking, now that we say like a Michael Bunting is out and somebody like a Tyler Bertuzzi is in?
Exactly. So okay. Bunting is out, Kerfoot is out, Hall is out. All these players that, thought there was a good connection with Keefe are now gone. But what can we expect from Keefe with his roster decisions right now that some of those players that he looked to in the past aren't there anymore?
Well, I think the biggest thing for him priority-wise is trying to find chemistry between these players, right? Like figuring out who on this, because the regular season for the guys like Mitch Marner, Austin Matthews, William Nylander, it's never really been a big question about whether or not they're going to be any good, because they're always pretty good. Injuries are one thing, but they play really well. It's the playoffs that become the issue a lot for the Toronto Maple Leafs and these Stars, and whether or not you want to argue it's Keefe who can't get them there, or the players themselves who can't bring them up to that level during the playoffs. But what you need to do if you're Keefe is you got to find the mix of players on those lines, whether you want to do duos or trios or however you look at it. If you're a coach and you got to find that early, right? You got to figure out, okay, who's going to be the tandem that's going to really kind of kick things off, because Tyler Bertuzzi is going to be motivated to come in and have a big year. Max Domi is going to be motivated to come in and have a big year, but none of that matters if they don't have any chemistry with these guys. So you got to figure out who that is, and you got to figure it out early. So I think that's the real test for Keefe, is if you can figure out who meshes well and who clicks, then they could really, steamroll and build up, and kind of their momentum can carry them through. But if they struggle early to find that mix, and a Matthews and a Bertuzzi or a Marner, they don't click well, then I think you have a problem, right? So you got to figure that out early.
And especially considering the fact that, the left wing has been the weakest spot for the Maple Leafs, so to speak, where they've tried and find a replacement since Zach Hyman left. You've tried it with Michael Bunting. There was the signing of Nick Ritchie, did not work out. Alex Kerfoot was, as we mentioned, was one of his players that he would bump up into the lineup, but he had very little results as a top six forward. So now that you have the experience of a Bertuzzi, a Domi, and even Matthew Knies for that matter, where you have more options that are legitimate top 6 players or players that can be in your top 6, as opposed to a third line speedy, not necessarily tenacious winger, but a player that has a speed to go in and, try and disturb some things up with his speed and skill. Although Kerfoot wasn't that quite physical, you have a replacement in Kerfoot and Domi that could try and replicate that. But now you have 2 top 6 options at your disposal, and you're not, scrambling to try and find a player that you can move up into the lineup right now. You have 3 good options that can be at your disposal. I think the big question mark is too, as much as we have, criticized Justin Hall at points, at times throughout the season. It is tough because now you have a hole on the right-hand side, and what's going to happen? Are you going to have McCabe and Brody as a pairing? Who's going to be with Morgan Riley? Is it going to be Timothy Liljegren? Is he going to move up? And I could understand the experience with Hall. At least he had that reassurance, but he still wasn't up to par as a top 4 defender.
Yeah, the defense is going to be the area that I think, not necessarily Keefe. I mean, he's going to have to figure it out, but if there's something True Living is still going to want to do, it's probably on the blue line, right? Like that's probably where there's going to be, of any more upgrades. I don't know how they'll do it, but if they are going to make another upgrade, that's probably where they're going to try to do it, right? So yes, Keith's going to have to figure out who fits well, who meshes, where the chemistry is, but I do think that True Living's probably looking at this. We've heard that he's looking for more physicality on the blue line, and there are whispers, and I don't know how accurate they are, but that maybe TJ Brody's the kind of guy who would go out to get somebody more physical to come in. He's probably your best defensive defenseman on the whole team, so I don't know why you would trade him unless you really have an upgrade that you can get, whether it's from Calgary or something like that. But I think there's probably going to be some tinkering there, both from the coach and maybe with the GM on the blue line. So maybe that's one of the bigger question marks coming into this. Is it going to be the blue line that starts and finishes the season? Will it look the same? I don't really know about that one, but I think there's going to be some tinkering there.
That'll be something to talk about all season long, especially when the season kicks off. And speaking of the season kicking off, we're just right around the corner from training camp. And yes, 2 out of 3 things on True Living's list has been crossed off. Matthews extended, perfect. Keefe extended, perfect. Now everything shifts over to William Nylander. And we've talked about this before when, we kept talking about Austin Matthews, what's going to happen with Nylander, but now 2 out of the 3 are signed. What's going to happen right now? Because it seems like it's very, very quiet, and it may seem like a bad sign, but I was reading something from, a lot of media outlets, TSN, the Hockey News with David Alter. There were quotes from True Living that he is the priority right now. He is next on the list. He talked about him wanting to be in Toronto, and that is a big priority. But considering how things are very quiet right now heading into the season, what do you make of the contract negotiation still? Is this still like one of those things where it's part of the process, or is this something that's going to continue to not necessarily escalate, but we continue to learn more throughout the season, and maybe it comes to an agreement during, the regular season or even at the end of next season?
My guess is they're probably not all that close. Whether or not you want to call that an escalation when that goes out and becomes public, I don't know that I would define that as something escalating. I'm just guessing that at some point we're going to learn that they were never close. They're still not close, and they're probably not close enough to get it done if that's what ends up happening. So that won't have been an escalation. I think that'll always have been the reality. It's just now out there, right? So we don't know for sure that that's where they're at. We have these, inklings from insiders that have said, they're not close. Nylander wants one thing, and Maple Leafs are only comfortable going to a certain point. And so there's no talks right now. It's really quiet. It's just kind of like, well, we'll see how this goes. I believe the Maple Leafs are going to play this out. Like, unless something happens with another roster where some player, I don't think it'll be like a Lindholm, but let's say like Elias Lindholm tells Calgary, I'm not staying. Right. And then Calgary goes, okay, we need to make a plan for Elias Lindholm. And then all of a sudden the Maple Leafs are like, wow, okay, a player is available. Let's say Patrick Kane comes to Toronto and says, you know what, I'm looking at you. I like you. So then all of a sudden the dynamic changes, the narrative around Toronto changes, because then you're like, okay, well, we have somebody to come in who can fill in for Nylander, so we need to push him to do this. And if he's not going to do this, then maybe we move him. But if that doesn't happen, like no other team has a player, or there's no free agent that comes and says, hey, I'm looking at you, or I don't want to be at this team anymore, move me. I think they keep Nylander. I think they'll just run him through the season. I think they'll run him through the deadline. they'll probably push him through the playoffs, and then they'll take a look at this again in the summer. And if he's not going to sign, they'll move his rights for whatever they can get, and he'll probably move on. But yeah, I just don't think there's anything happening right now. I think it's probably just a matter of their two sides are kind of too far apart. They've decided to maybe take a step back. I do believe that Trilliving wants to get this done. I think they'll keep talking, and he'll probably approach the subject every once in a while. We hear a lot about how negotiations don't necessarily happen during the season. A lot of players and teams don't like to have them. So I don't know what that means for Nylander in Toronto. But yeah, I'm guessing that this probably, unless Nylander changes his mind, this ain't getting done before the season starts.
Yeah, and it seems like this might be a very quick point to talk about because there really isn't a whole lot of information to base off of. Obviously, Nylander feels like he's a $10 million guy. That was a rumored asking price, but now that everything is quiet, what's going to happen from here on out? I think that's going to be very, very key. And I really wish that it would get done sooner. I think we would all want that to happen because he has been very clutch. And I think this season alone, Nylander said he's in no rush, which kind of like shows that, you know, he has said he wants to stay in Toronto. He wants everything to play out. But I think this is wondering maybe him trying to play his hand and actually show that if he has another repeat season like last year, then he has a case saying that, yeah, you know, 3 straight seasons of 80 points. I feel like I'm a $10 million guy right now. And it is very possible because he has come up very clutch, especially in the postseason. We've talked about that, how when Matthews and Marner are quiet, Nylander's there to carry the load. So it is interesting to see how this will play out because it seems like we knew that there were news about Matthews and we were starting to get more and more, although Matthews was the one to break his own contract, which is kind of funny, but it doesn't seem like this is happening right now. So although we would like to have a contract in place, I think they're still playing it out both for player and on the team side as well. So we'll see what happens, but it's definitely going to be interesting. And if it does happen during the season, I will be very, very shocked because like you said, you hardly see that ever happen.
Yeah, and why would you rush if you're Nylander, right? Like, because two scenarios are going to play out here. Either you're going to have a really good season and there's going to be a ton of teams come calling when the cap goes up over the summer, or you're going to have a mediocre season and Toronto's still going to give you $8.5 million. Like, that's probably what he's looking at here. So he's going, okay, well, either I play pretty well and I get a minimum of 8.5, even if I have a crappy season, some team's going to give me this. So I'm probably secure knowing that I'm going to get paid about what they're offering me now. If I have a really good season, I can use it as leverage. And when the cap goes up, there's going to be a lot of teams looking at me. So I know I'm going to probably get 9.5 to 10 million. So why would you not? Like, it just doesn't make any sense in his situation, unless he really doesn't want to go anywhere else. And he's just like, yeah, well, they're not going to budge and they're never going to budge. So this is what I want. I just don't think that's probably his reality. Does he want to stay? Sure. Will he move on? Probably, if he needs to get paid.
Absolutely. And we're not done with the contract talk just yet, but we do have a quick word from the hockey writers.
Interested in writing for the Hockey Writers? If you have experience writing about hockey, are passionate about the sport, and are looking to take your writing to the next level, the Hockey Writers could be the place for you. Here at THW, you will have the opportunity to hone your craft at one of the world's largest and most respected hockey publishers. You will have control over what you write, be able to seek out media credentials, and be supported by a large network of writers and editors. Plus, you'll get paid for doing it. If you're interested and want to know more about team openings and requirements, please visit the Write for THW page on the Hockey Writers website. A link to that page is also listed in the description.
And we're back with the Maple Leafs Lounge. As we ended off the first part of our show, we were talking about the Nylander negotiations, and this was in my notes too. And we have a little group chat, Jim, about what to include, and I completely forgot about this included in there. Tyler Bertuzzi. There was rumors about the possibility of the Maple Leafs wanting to sign him long term. There was a mutual agreement from both sides, and that was per Elliot Friedman from Sportsnet. Instead, they settled on the 1-year deal. Obviously, I think players on a 1-year deal, they have until January 1st where they could sign that extension. Given how there was that mutual interest for both sides, is a Bertuzzi extension likely in the cards, or is this all depending on what happens with, let's say, a William Nylander?
Yeah, just to clarify, he is eligible to sign as of January 1st. So anything after that, he's good to go. But yeah, like that was the report from Friedman, was that they both talked about a long-term deal. Both were really quite interested in doing it. Toronto just didn't have the financial ability to do it. And Bertuzzi wanted a certain amount, and Toronto decided, you know what, we're going to just do these short-term flexible contracts and we'll see what's what. I guess the reality is, why would you know if he's even going to look at this or the team's going to look at this until they get a good look at the first 25 to 30 games of the season, right? If Bertuzzi doesn't have a wonderful season and Toronto's like, well, we tried, we'll see why would you sign it early? Let the season play out, figure out what you want to do. He probably will look at Toronto as he looks at every other team when he's a free agent again in the summer and go, okay, well, what are you guys offering? Okay, let me check the market and we'll see what's what. Unless they decide, you know what, yeah, I really like the fit here in Toronto, and Toronto's like, yeah, he's playing great. I don't know why you would necessarily look at January 1st as the time that you would want to get that done. Just because he's eligible doesn't mean you should. At least this gives Toronto the flexibility and the freedom to go, man, we thought this would work out. We thought the chemistry, when we talked about chemistry, right? We thought the chemistry would be there, but it isn't. So you thank goodness we did not do this long term, right? That's a possibility. That could really happen. And if it does, then you're like, okay, we'll figure it out. Maybe we'll look at this again, but maybe we won't. Maybe we'll just let him go and we'll go after another free agent. But yeah, if he rocks it and he has a great season, it looks like he's on pace for 30, 35 goals or something, then yeah, maybe you want to look at it before the whole market can take a shot at him. But I don't think it happens. It's just possible, but I don't see it happening.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of factors too. I think one thing maybe they settled on that 1 year is because of his health. It has been an issue the last few seasons. I mean, he's looking at his games played. He has rarely played a full 82 game season. Maybe that looked like it was going to happen in 2021, 22, but then again, things happen. And I think with him, his health, I think that's the main thing why they settled on that 1 year deal. And yeah, if he's able to, excel in that very small sample size, because he has shown to play with top tier players in the past. We saw him elevate his play with the Bruins. We saw him play very steady with the Detroit Red Wings and their top line. I think this is a player that you have to at least consider or maybe look at the possibility of signing him long term. And even so that the cap is going up as well, I think that's another big factor as well. If it's going to go up by, roughly that $4 million that it's supposed to go up, it'll definitely benefit the Maple Leafs because now they have more space to sign someone like him to extend Mitch Marner because he's going to be up at the end of, I believe, next season. Him and Tavares have one more. So that just includes the cap is going to, or means the cap is going to go up after the season after that. So yeah, it's definitely interesting that, there was that mutual interest. And that's always a good sign too, that the player wants to sign with the team because that player feels like that team has a winning chance. And now that he's signing that 1 year deal, I think this is sort of that prove it deal where if you do play well, you will get that multi-year extension. I just think kind of like you, I do agree that the 1 year deal was the best fit for the team and the players to just try and see, hey, if you can stay healthy, if you can still replicate the success that you had, it's going to be a good, time or a good time to put pen to paper and work on that extension.
For me, I think the more realistic option is that this happens with someone like Max Domi, right? Like if Max Domi comes in, he wants to be a Maple Leaf. He wanted to stay long-term. He would have signed for lower money to do that. They just didn't do it. If he comes in and he has a decent season and he's willing to stick around for a lot less than he probably could get on the open market, which I think is probably the reality of his situation. Yeah, I could see that deal getting done, right? Like I could see Max Domi and Toronto coming to terms on the 1st of January and going, okay, you want to be here. We like what you're doing so far. We can get you an affordable number for the next 2 or 3 years. Yeah, let's get it done. With Bertuzzi, if he plays well, he's going to want to test the market, right? So
that's true.
Domi probably doesn't. Domi just wants the security and wants to be a Maple Leaf. So he just needs to play well enough to get that conversation started. I see that happening, not necessarily with Tyler Bertuzzi.
Yeah, and it's great to point out because, 49 points in 60 games with the Blackhawks before he got traded to the Dallas Stars. 7 points there, but he did pop off in the playoffs, which is, always a good sign that he's able to rise to the occasion in the postseason because you do need secondary scoring there. So yeah, I do feel like that if Domi does kind of similar like Bertuzzi, if Domi does have that, and if he knows he wants to stay here for the foreseeable future, yeah, you get that contract going, give him that 3, 4, maybe even 5-year deal at a decent AAV, maybe around $3 million that he's still earning right now. If he's willing to still take the same money that he is right now, I think that's a good sign that both team and player is going to benefit both of them from that.
Yeah, he's the kind of person who could surprise you with how low a contract he signs on an AAV, but gets more years out of it, right? Yeah. Just so that he knows he's staying. Like I could see him signing a 4 or 5 year deal at much lower value than you would think, just because he's like, well, at least I'm here now. I don't got to go nowhere. I'm good for the next 4 or 5 years. I could totally see that happening.
Absolutely. And career 370 points in 581 games. Things may have, taken that bit of a nosedive after that 72-point campaign with the Montreal Canadiens, but he has managed to still provide decent production overall as sort of like a middle six type player. So we'll see what happens there. Then again, January 1st is when, players can sign those contracts. So we'll be keeping an eye out for those later on. And speaking of earning contracts, again, this is all just contracts on this episode right now.
Yeah.
The Maple Leafs signed former San Jose Shark Noah Gregor to a professional tryout. And obviously that really doesn't mean much, but for players like that, it's still a chance for them to prove themselves, as an opportunity that they can still stay on an NHL roster. And obviously, when you look at Gregor's numbers with the San Jose Sharks, they weren't very eye-popping. You're not going to get a whole lot out of him in terms of production because he's, good for like maybe 10 goals, 20 points, but maybe he could go a little bit more on a good team. What is your initial thoughts with the PTO, Jim?
Toronto's going to have to do a couple of these, right? Like if they're going to get any more players in their cap situation and they want to add some depth and get some competition in camp and stuff like that, they're going to probably even sign maybe one more of these. Noah Gregor's a good choice. I was a little surprised actually that he didn't get a contract from somebody. So he's fast. I don't know that he's going to give you a ton of point production. We'll see if he has the right chemistry with somebody. He could possibly pop off a little bit, but he's pretty quick. Like this is a guy that's had some speed in his game, and Tree Living added some size and not necessarily some speed during the summer. So it would be nice to be able to add that mix. Does he get a job coming out of camp? I don't know. If he can play in the bottom six and he can play, a role there. For example, like a Nick Robertson, I don't necessarily see him making an impact on the team this year because he's probably more a top six guy when he's healthy, or a top nine for sure. But how good is he on a fourth line? Probably. Can Noah Gregor fill that role? That's the kind of a question, right? Like, is he a better depth guy? And if he is, maybe Toronto could use him. That's probably where he's going to have a shot at this. If he can prove that he's going to be somebody who doesn't need to play in the top six to be effective, then you never know. There could be a shot here. But outside of the speed and stuff, maybe I put it 50-50 that he's got a shot at making this team.
Yeah, and that's always, it's really a coin flip because we saw with Zach Aston-Reese last year. I think there was more of a chance where they were going to give him that contract no matter what. This one is still a little bit up in the air. And the last 2 seasons, 40 points, 18 goals. So as we mentioned, he does have that underrated shot. He can find the back of the net. 119 shots last season, 156 the season before that in 21-22. And he does bring that, bit of peskiness, that edge, because he has known to throw the body around. And his play at the World Hockey Championships about, I believe it was 2 tournaments ago, not this one, the one before that. He looked really good in the depth role. And I think if you put him on a really good team, and if he's able to come into camp, throw the body around, be that, consistent fourth line grinder that he was supposed to be with the Sharks, I think it's going to be a good addition for the Maple Leafs because they could use a little bit more of that bite. And obviously the big thing is his when I did a quick hit on the Gregor PTO, or when I was looking at his underlying numbers, they were not that great. But the good thing is he was able to pick it up later on in the season. So I think that's a good sign where maybe it was just a little bit too little too late to earn a contract with the Sharks, but he's getting that opportunity with the Maple Leafs right now to try and sign with the team. But then again, the Maple Leafs are still in that cap crunch. They're going to have to figure out what to do to try and fit him in if that is the case.
Yeah, he's got a real opportunity to do well in preseason games and show really well and give Toronto a reason to think about cutting him. And if he does get cut, that he's got a really good shot if he produces well of another team looking at him and going, well, we like that guy over there, right? Because that's the thing with the PTO is anybody can sign you and you can sign anywhere. So you're not committed to the team just because you're trying out with them and you're getting looks in their preseason games. You can sign wherever you want. So if he has a really good preseason and he shows really well, he could sign anywhere. So he's got all the power here to win himself a job somewhere. Whether it's with Toronto or another team, I don't know. But yeah, he's got the ability to do it.
Absolutely. And yeah, that's the big thing about this time of the season right now, where still NHLers are still looking to try and keep their footing in the door and maintain that roster spot. And speaking of roster spots, the Maple Leafs rookie tournament, or NHL teams are releasing their rookie rosters for all of these mini tournaments going on right now to kickstart the preseason. And the Maple Leafs, they still haven't announced their roster just yet. It is going to happen soon, but they do go to Traverse City for their rookie tournament later on this week. I believe their first game is Thursday. Jim, what are you looking forward to, or what is your one expectation for the rookies that the Maple Leafs have this time around heading into the tournament?
Well, I'm going to answer this question, but I'm going to flip it back to you because you're the guy. I know that you're waiting for this stuff, and it's like Christmas Eve and waiting for Santa in the morning. And what did you get? I know that's you right now, so you're aching. Yeah. What I will say for my opinion is that you just really want to see that you've got, your pipeline looks strong. So the window to win in Toronto is probably the next 3 or 4 years. And you want to know that anybody that you're looking at right now is going to be able to eventually fill spots down the line. But when it comes to certain players and certain prospects that you got to keep, I want your opinion on this because you're that guy. You're the guy that covers the draft. You're the guy that covers the prospects. You really look at this stuff way more in depth than I ever do. So I'm more curious about what you think.
Yeah, it's definitely, obviously, when you look at the rosters or the other teams' rosters, the Maple Leafs is not that strong because they're going up against, the Columbus Blue Jackets. They have Adam Fantilli. The Dallas Stars, they have Maverick Bourque and Logan Stankoven, and all these big name prospects coming up in their pipelines. But the Maple Leafs still do have names that are like middle of the tier that can still provide that depth option. Obviously, you're going to look at Fraser Minton, someone who's going to come in, and his tournament was cut short last year, but now he has an opportunity. He has more experience. He's healthy. I want to see him be that kind of player with that two-way game, the crashing, the crashing and the hitting mentality that he plays with the physicality. He has a really great shot. Either on the power play or 5-on-5. I want to see him make his presence felt like he did at the rookie camp or development camp for the Maple Leafs early on. Obviously, I want to see Topi Niemela and his progression. Looked good then. I want to see him up against, more competition right now. Got his feet a little bit wet in the AHL as well. And even someone on a, invite only as a free agent is Mazen Leslie. This is a player that probably should have been taken in the later rounds as a flyer, 6th or 7th round. But, there were questions about his defensive game, but he is a good, strong puck moving forward, and he does play with a bit of an edge as well. Something that I think the Maple Leafs, that's their mentality that they're going with right now. If someone like him performs well at this tournament, I think this opens up a contract for him to try and sign an ELC, because if you get invited to their camp, that opens up that opportunity. And if Mazen Leslie does have that, I think it could be a really good signing for him that, he won't have to re-enter through the draft. He already went through it once. But if the Maple Leafs like what they have or what they see in him in this tournament with his puck moving abilities and offensive game, I think that's a good sign for him as well.
Yeah, it's tough when you're Toronto, right? When in the last few years, you've been giving away all your first-round picks to improve your team. You've been doing everything that you can, and you're playing pretty well, so you don't exactly have the highest of first-round picks anyway when you do have them. So it's not like you've got this really high marquee profile prospect list coming into camp. So, it's going to be interesting to see if there's any, gold nuggets in there that they can pull out of those camps and go, you know what, this is a player that we should really be considering. Because you're right, they don't have the high profile guys that were picked in the top 5, and they haven't for a long time.
Yeah, there are other names in my mind as well, but I'm not going to say anything in case they are left off. But those are the names that I feel like have a good chance to make it, or that they would be on this roster heading into, I believe the roster is going to come out on Tuesday, and then for the games on Thursday as well.
No, it'll be a fun time to watch that stuff.
Absolutely. I can't wait. Anytime that hockey is on, I'm going to be watching it. I know you're going to be waiting for everything to kick off as well, Jim, but that is all the time that we have this time around for this episode of the Maple Leafs Lounge. Be sure to check out the Hockey Writers and the Maple Leafs team as well. Both Jim and I and everyone else on the Maple Leafs team have been putting out content daily and constantly as well. Be sure to check out every other team as well. We have fantastic writers throughout the Hockey Writers team as well. Be sure to check them out. But that is all that we have for this episode of Maple Leafs Lounge. For Jim Parsons, I'm Peter Baracchini, and we will see you next time on the Maple Leafs Lounge.